How are you? Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, nice to talk to you again.
Congratulations on the film. I really, really loved it.
Thank you. The extra really, I believed.
Yeah, you're right. The first one I would have made up.
Come to me. Come to me. Hear my call. Come to me.
I'm going to show you a picture. I think you know what it's going to be, but I really love it. And this is a radio and podcast. Can you describe what you're looking at when I show you this picture here?
It is a black and white image of Count Orlok drinking Ellen's blood, but it's from a stage play that I did when I was 17 years old. And even more embarrassingly, I am Orlok in that picture.
Tell me a little bit about doing Nosferatu when you were 17 on stage.
My friend Ashley Kelly Tata who's now an opera and stage director in her own right. We directed a play in high school of Nosferatu. It was black and white on stage, like black and white costumes, sets, makeup, wigs, and very humble. You know, we did it in our high school. But then a gentleman, Edward Langlois, who had a local theater company that did interesting stuff. They would do Duchess of Malfi and True West instead of My Fair Lady. He saw that play and invited us to do a more professional version of it at his theater, and it changed my life. It cemented the fact that I wanted to be a director, and Nosferatu has been, a major part of my of who I am, I suppose, like as someone who's trying to make creative work.
Why? Like when did you first come across it?
When I was 9 years old was the first time that I saw the Murnau film, and it had a major impact on me. Like I was already into vampires and Dracula, and see the Bela Lugosi movie a couple times, and had been Dracula for Halloween, but the VHS that that I had was made from a bad 16 millimeter print. And and because it was so degraded, it felt sort of authentic. It felt like it was unearthed from the past, and that there was something real about Max Schreck's vampire and about the atmosphere of the film. And it was just very haunting, and something that stayed with me as a young person and as an adult is that Murnau and his collaborators turned the Stoker novel into a simple fairy tale. And I actually think that it's that fairy tale that's within the Stoker novel that has been more influential than the Stoker novel as a whole.
Help me understand that. What do you mean?
Well, I think, if there's very few filmic versions that attempt to do a straight adaptation of the novel, because it is in some ways like kind of clunky, and Dracula is coming to England seemingly to take over the world, and Mina and Lucy are just convenient throats that happen to be there. But so many versions take what Murnau set up, where he sees the photograph of the estate agent or the solicitor that comes to visit him and becomes obsessed with her, or potentially starting with the Dan Curtis version. Maybe there's other versions that he's a reincarnation of Dracula's long lost love. So this gothic love story and this fairy tale of a vampire is finally what makes like Dracula more enduring than even Stoker.
What you're sort of setting up the next question I wanted to ask you,
okay,
which is when there are so many adaptations of the Dracula story, when you are so influenced by Nosferatu and you do it as a kid, you even said something like it's part of my being, or it's part of who I am, which I'm dying to know more about. But first I'll ask, when you do get an opportunity to take this on, what does it need to be? What do you start thinking about? This is what I want my Nosferatu to be.
Yeah, I mean, people have often asked me what was difficult about adapting something that's been adapted so many times, and there is difficulties. Like I knew, like knowing that I'm going to have to do like the Hutter or Harker character coming to the vampire's castle, which has been captured like incredibly well in many filmic versions, like that becomes very intimidating. But you also can see, you also look, okay, what's always great, what's sometimes great but not always, what never works, what's always missing, and that can be also point you in a good direction. And what may, and obviously, yes, I'm obsessed with Nosferatu, passionate about it, dorky about it, but why do it again? And and when I came across the idea that if it's about Ellen's character, Lily-Rose Depp, the female character, if it's the female protagonist is the central protagonist, I have the opportunity for the story to be potentially more emotionally and psychologically complex instead of an adventure story about a real estate agent.
How did that come to you? Because you're right off the bat, the scene between Lily-Rose Depp's character and Nosferatu is right away you're into a different film than the original 22, which I watched last night, by the way, to get ready for this, which was very, very fun. How did that come to you, to center it around the female character?
Well, so obviously Murnau and his collaborators had the sensitivity and insight to make Ellen the heroine by the last act.
Yeah, she has to be.
Yeah, in this version, in his version, in their version. But Ellen is a somnambulist or a sleepwalker, and in the 19th century, that meant to people, including many doctors, that you had an insight into another realm. This was very exciting. This is something I can play with. This is something I can explore. So we have this woman who doesn't fit. She's an outsider. She doesn't fit into 19th century society. I say in the press notes, but it's true. She's as much a victim of the 19th century society as she is the vampire. But
right.
And no one understands her, and she's alone, and she has a deep understanding of something that she doesn't have language for. And her husband loves her, and she loves her husband, but he doesn't get it. He is dismissive of her. She's called melancholic. She's called hysteric. And then she's pulled to this darkness, and the only person, in big quotes, that she can connect with is a demon lover, is a vampire, So that was all very exciting to explore.
Standing before me, all in black, was death. But I was so happy. So very happy. We exchanged vows. We embraced. And when we turned around, everyone was dead. Father and everyone. The stench of their bodies was horrible. But I'd never been so happy.
How did you want your Orlok to look?
In the evolution of the cinematic vampire, from Max Schreck to Edward Cullen, the vampire is no longer scary, and so I wanted to go back to the folk when that was written.
You're right. They're not scary. It's a cartoon. I get it. Yeah.
But in the folklore that was written about and by people who actually believed in vampires and thought they were real, I felt that that's where I could find something frightening. And these vampires of early folklore are, walking putrid corpses. And so then, of course, the question I ask myself is, what would a dead Transylvanian nobleman actually look like? And so with a bit of research, you get what we have on screen.
Folklorically, what were you looking for? Were you looking in German history, Romanian history?
Yeah, Romanian history. I mean, the earliest stuff kind of comes from the Balkan region, both Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, and Romania. But I, as my research continued, I really focused on Romania and Transylvania as much as I could. And after I did a ton of my own research and had written a script, by the time we were in prep, I also brought on Florin Lazarescu, who's a Romanian novelist, poet, playwright, screenwriter, and folklore expert to come on and help guide additional research. He and also Orlok in the film, the vampire in the film, when he's doing his magical incantations, he speaks ancient Dacian, which is a dead language, and the language that the ancestors of the ethnic Romanians would have spoken. And Florin does his interpretation of ancient Dacian for us.
Well, this is such a rare thing I get to say to somebody else and not have to apologize for it. But I'm a folklorist. That was my degree. I did my 4-year program in folklore.
Awesome.
And one of the things we always studied was not just that myth and legend exists, but what function did myth and legend have in the society at the time? When I was watching your film, I was thinking a lot about social mobility. I was thinking a lot about the oppression of women. I was thinking, I don't know, I could go on forever about what I was thinking about. I'm more interested in you. In your research, what did you learn about the function of vampiric tales in the society at the time? And was that on your mind making the film?
I mean, yeah. I mean, one nice thing about real vampires as opposed to real witches is that when you know, I mean, both vampires and witches are scapegoats, but when you kill a witch, you're killing a living person, and when you disinter a corpse and stake them and cut their head off and burn them, they're already dead. So that's kind of nice. But there's an interesting story of vampirism that is only 20 years old in southern Romania. There was a man who was very volatile and an alcoholic, and when he died, his family thought he was coming back as his strigoi, the Romanian word for vampire, and he was particularly targeting, his daughter-in-law, who was like traumatized by these visitations by this family member of hers, and she became very ill. And they called the vampire hunter from a few villages over who still remembered how to do these things. They disinterred the corpse and destroyed it in a ritual fashion, and she was cured. But it makes you think, like, what's the trauma that doesn't go away after death?
What are the secrets that we hold with us and the trauma that you live through that we use sort of vampires and the supernatural to help explain? I'm not shocked, because I think last time you and I talked, we got nerdy about the specificity of East Coast lighthouses for a long time, and you continue to get a lot of attention for your historical authenticity. I mean, I was getting ready for this, stories about you trying to figure out how long Orlok's sleeves should be, and building a very accurate Transylvania. But what I've never heard you talk about is why that's important. Why, as a
Ever
viewer,
heard me talk about that?
No. Let me finish it. I understand why it's important to you, and I understand why it's important in your storytelling. As a viewer, I am very curious as to. I may not even notice that things are accurate. I might have had to have the knowledge that this is accurate. But what does it do for me as a filmmaker when it is?
I think a lot of, look, I wouldn't say the historical accuracy equates as good. It certainly doesn't equate as good storytelling or good filmmaking. But I think, my belief is that, like, you buy into the world more. But atmosphere is an accumulation of details, and the more details you have, the more dense the atmosphere is, and the more that the audience can be transported into the story. And when I use historical research, there's an abundance of details because I'm not having to invent things. And me and my creative heads of department, we all know what we're after. We're after this impossible idea of historical accuracy, but that all aligns us, and it pushes us into a direction to just recreate all this stuff. And I think that should pull the audience into the world. And also, if you're dealing with metaphysical things like a vampire, they can perhaps believe in the vampire more, because whether or not they actually know the reference or not, they can feel that it is grounded. You know what I'm saying? They can, that's the hope. That's the theory.
Beautiful. I was reading history. I started on Wikipedia, but then I went a bit further, reading about the history of the 22 Nosferatu and about the sort of the influence of World War I on the film. That the producer, the director, and the actor had all served on the Eastern Front with the Germans. Am I right about that?
Yep.
So I started reading, about how their experiences may have influenced either wanting to tell the story in the producer's case, or in Max Schreck's case, the person who played Nosferatu, how he may have been withdrawn, how PTSD might have gotten in, might have been a part of his portrayal. And then I read about how the world coming out of World War I and coming out of the Spanish flu was interested in the story of Nosferatu. because the plague was involved as well, and it was a time of great tumult. I don't have to tell you that we're coming out of a massive pandemic, and the world does feel unstable right now. Are you thinking about the world your Nosferatu is coming out into in parallel with the one the original one came out into?
I can't help but consider it, but in writing it and making it, that wasn't like what I was. I was just trying to tell this story, you know.
Of course. Sorry, of course. I'm not implying that you saw the world around you and it was time to make Nosferatu. More just observation. This is something you're noticing.
Yes, it's impossible to ignore. Yeah. I mean, I don't. You know, I'm not the best social critic, and I think other people do it better than me. You know, I'm like, all my films like express a kind of nostalgia and longing for a time when there was a lot more sacred and a lot less profane. So I think that, you know, I spend my time like in fairyland. So I'm just not the best social critic.
I just love that. Listen, I could talk to you forever about this. I could talk to you a little bit about how you want to move forward as a director after this. What happens when you make the film that's been captivating you your entire life? But we'll do it another time.
Yeah, well, I sincerely hope we do. I always enjoy speaking with you.